welcome everyone to Skills Connect. Skills Connect is a series where we have conversations with the most bold and most transformational leaders of our time. Today, I am super excited to welcome Dennis Di Lorenzo to this conversation. We've got a really incredible conversation coming up. Everything from shaping education to training to leadership programs across multiple different industries. So get excited, people, because this one's going to be a good one. My name is Siobhan Savage. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Reejig, and we're very excited, Dennis, to have you here. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Siobhan. Hello, everyone. I'm Dennis Di Lorenzo. I'm a director of skilling strategy for Micron and a workforce development specialist and a higher ed leader for the last 30 plus years.
Showing a little bit of your age there, Dennis.
Yeah, I know. Right?
Well, I thought it would be really amazing as I've got to know you. There's so many dimensions to the way that you think. And I think, there's a lot of conversation happening right now about skills. And we've been kind of in this place about skills for maybe 5 plus 6 years. I know you've spent your career on this, and I would love you to tell us a little bit about, how skills has become your passion and where did it get to and where are you going on this because of what you see?
Sure. So my passion for skills, I would reframe the question. My passion is really how do we create greater accessibility to work for all populations, right? And that is really where my career started in workforce development. I had 25 years at NYU in the School of Continuing Education, Professional Studies. I've worked across every industry that you can imagine for 25 years. And my passion really was driven by all levels of the workforce and how do you create economic empowerment for people to access work, right? And on the other side of that, clearly, work has been changing over the last, as you say, I'm showing my age, 30 years in the way we work. The work that we're doing has been impacted by technology, productivity, efficiency, and various shifts in the job economy and in the economy generally. And so my passion, it really has been, how do you create readiness for companies in work, and how do you create readiness in candidates? And so this term skills has taken on various meanings in, I would say, a job economy that was dependent on credentials as a validator of competence and capability. And the term skills really took hold when people realized, or I should say hiring managers realized, credential wasn't enough anymore to assess capability for immediate impact in job role. And I think that word immediate is an important component of where we are today. I lived in a job economy where as you entered the workforce or you upscaled into new positions, there was always time to learn your role and hit the ground running, and in a different way of you can learn while you were working. And today, businesses are looking for immediate impact because what they need in job function is tied to their bottom lines. And if people aren't ready to, and we talk about future ready versus readiness for day one, I don't think companies are thinking it through very clearly. Onboarding programs have extended because of lack of readiness to perform functions. And so this term skill has taken on the meaning of how do we find a more qualified workforce in order to perform the tasks we need performed in order to meet our business objectives. And I'm simplifying it, but that's really where the skills economy has become at the forefront of our dialogue the last 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Capability.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is the world we find ourselves in now. So, you've kind of watched my evolution of thought over the years, going from really focused on skill to actually really focused on work. And one of the major primers of our connection point is Micron obviously is right at the forefront of the evolution of AI, given
Yes,
what you do as a business, right? You are actually the bedrock for the curation of the AI when you think about it.
absolutely.
And I think there is a really big conversation that's happening across markets right now, being led not from CPOs, but from the CEO
Yes,
around building the AI powered workforce.
yes.
And how do you see where we were in terms of the skills economy to now kind of orchestrating that in this new world where AI becomes an actual worker? Like what's your vision, and like what are you forecasting for that, Dennis?
What I'm forecasting for that is we have to think about AI in in the context of a tool set that's going to create greater productivity and efficiency. And to your point, you've heard chief people officers talk about the impact of AI on workforce and work. CEOs are thinking about greater efficiency and productivity, automation, and AI enablement, right? And AI isn't just anymore a tool that can help, it's actually an engine driving the business.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about AI as an engine driving the business, the real question is, how do you bring people along to work alongside the AI versus the AI working alongside of people, right? Is how I would describe it.
Yeah. And
And and I think when CEOs are thinking about it, they understand that people are still at the center of work, but the work that they're going to have to perform has to be in partnership with the AI. Otherwise, you're going to be outmoded very quickly as a business. I'm not even talking about the worker now.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen in market, and I'm super lucky that I get to go into some of the biggest companies in the world and talk to CEO, to CPO, to chief AI officers, and I'm seeing there's exactly what you just said, is that the chief people officer is talking about it in terms of the workforce impacts, whereas the CEO is talking about it in terms of margin machines. How do I turn my business into a margin machine? How do I create more efficiency and velocity? And I think what's going to be really interesting, and I love your approach because you're super commercial, in the way that you're thinking. You're not thinking about it practically at just the HR level, which is the skill opportunity and how that means for the individuals and your workforce development plans. You're actually thinking about what does my business need and how am I going to enable the workforce to deliver on that strategy. And I think this is where I think there is some education that needs to happen into market today, where as folks within the HR teams are starting to come up to like speed really quickly with what this means, is that there is a big commercial gap that's missing right now in terms of your CEO has probably more pressure on them today than they've ever had in any time of being a CEO. Their role right now is to not only win, but to be commercially efficient, to be completely optimized, and org effectiveness is really important. While at the same time as the economy and society and the employees will hold them to account to make sure that they don't leave people behind. And I think this is where we're really obsessed with like bold reinvention of your organization, but responsibility in terms of making sure that folks are not left behind, right?
Right. And it's how do you bridge business growth and social responsibility for economic empowerment of the workforce? And there's large debate about this. I think we both know in the marketplace, but the truth is companies have to focus on both if they're going to win.
Agree.
And
Agree.
and there is what I would say a partnership model that we all have to focus on in what is the new world of work going to mean for business productivity and economic empowerment of people in the workforce. And those things don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? It means that we need new infrastructure models in terms of intelligence about the business at the intersections of workforce intelligence, right? And we talk about skills and upskilling, and this has been my career for a very long time. But the reality is, how do you develop a new mindset as well as develop a new skill set in your workforce to meet these objectives is really the bigger question, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot being written on human-centered AI design. There's never going to be a world where people aren't going to be required to help and the economic agenda in the workforce. The real question is, how do you become more productive and efficient as AI takes over the engine of some more rote functions, some more critical thinking functions, but there's always a decision maker that has to move the business forward. I really believe the world of work is developing the strategic side of our team members versus the operational side, because it's that strategy, that strategic influence that people are going to have on reshaping business as you move forward. And those are skills that really need to be developed in team members, because it's going to make the business more efficient. That's the way I see it.
The thing that I think you've got a high level of like mastery at is that you are one, thinking about it on the workforce development side and like the skill economy within your business, but you're directly linking it into why the CEO should care. And I
Yes.
think that that's a really important thing. And I think the bold and responsible workforce strategy is the bold reinvention of an organization to make sure that you are profitable, that you are a margin machine, that you are all of those things that your board report is requesting. But to your point, that you're doing it in a way where you're enabling this new world of responsibility and not leaving folks behind, and finding that kind of synergy between where AI and where the sort of the workforce plays. And I think that's something that is really missing right now in our industry. And you know that we're doing a lot of work with, the learning forums and the Josh Berzins of the world, because we're really trying to educate the market right now to get them to the place where you are, which is that sort of bold, responsible. And one of the things that struck me like a couple of months ago was like, remember when the healthcare CEO thing happened?
Yes.
There was something pretty scary for me that like responsibility for CEO goes far beyond just the P&L. It now goes to this other thing from a society point of view and what is acceptable from our leaders. And that has never left my brain. We've always talked about zero waste in people and business and society being our whole mission. But actually, if people are now starting to try and hold others to account based on leadership decisions, my fear became, God, what happens in a world where we really drive towards AI? How do we make sure that we're thinking about it at a leader level to make sure that we're being held accountable as well? And that's where your society part comes in, which you're discussing. It's like, how do we balance that? And I think that bold and responsible way of thinking is critical. That, and if anyone is listening to this right now, if you are in the people team, you need to go and find your AI leader or your business leader who's responsible for this transformation and do what Dennis has done, like lead that conversation, because you've got an opportunity not only to position yourself right at the front of this, like Dennis has, but also to be in a situation where you're going to navigate the business through not just harvesting people out of work with AI, but doing both. And I think that's what you're really focused on right now, Dennis, which I love.
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Siobhan. Our social responsibility really is, how is work going to change? And I think one of the things that we're struggling with in 2025 is we have a traditional mindset of a 40-hour work week. We have a traditional mindset of location, time in office, and we're this whole remote work debate is aligned with the whole AI debate. We all need to adapt our mindsets into what is the greatest value that we're going to get out of our team members that promotes economic empowerment and people-centered AI. But if people are going to work differently, then we have to structure the work we expect from them differently.
Yeah. And that's big.
Yeah. And we're already seeing this the symptoms of this conversation in terms of how do I really measure the value of my workforce. And this is where we've talked about workforce intelligence. How do we measure performance has to change from a subjective world view. How do we build intelligence on contributions of our team members that are adding value to the business, instead of saying, well, I don't really know how to evaluate someone's performance, whether it be through the use of AI, whether they're a remote worker or sitting at a desk in the office. But how do I really, and I think to your point, CEOs are thinking about those margin machines, but part of those margin machines is what value am I extracting out of my workforce? And they're asking a lot more questions about how do we know value? And the only way you're going to do that is rebuild your infrastructure, identify your objectives, and actually put measure in that building that workforce infrastructure so that you can at least show proven value, because we know people have proven value in the workforce. We just haven't been able to measure it in the way in the way we need to for today's job economy. We're still measuring it based on old practice.
Yep, agree. And I'm going to show my age a little bit because I've been doing this over 25 years. And when I look back at the way that we were structuring our companies before, it was like, now I giggle a little bit because it's kind of like built for the dinosaurs, the way that job architectures have been structured. And here's my gripe with the job architecture right now. Like, HR is taking something that doesn't belong to them, which is work, that belongs to the business, and then they are labeling it in a way which is mostly being done towards REM frameworks because we needed some level of structuring for fairness, that part, take REM out of this whole thing, because it's not, my issue is not with REM. My issue is then how we've labeled and structured our companies. We have created these highly siloed organizations where jobs are functions that sit and don't ever, there's no dynamic or fluidness in terms of this. That the work, and if you look at a job architecture and you look at how that's being designed, how they're describing the work is not even how the business would reflect that if they were to have a conversation with you.
Right.
And then by the time you do your job architecture and finish that project, which costs so much money and takes everyone so much time, that it's already out of date by the time you sign the invoice and you pay the check, right? And this is where I'm like, and I really do want your view, because you're in this big reinvention mode right now. Like when I'm looking inside organizations, I'm like, I don't mean to be rude, but this is not, you're not going to build your AI powered workforce if you're building it on the infrastructure for the 80s. Like, there is like that's like, tell me more about that, because that's the part where I was like leaning in when you were talking. I was like, okay, tell me more. This is exciting.
Well, job architectures are role driven frameworks, right? Because the only way that we knew how to evaluate the value of an individual was based on the role that they were taking, and we had to find ways of classifying the level of role. And I'm using the word role because companies never really evaluate the do; they evaluate based on title, which is the 80s infrastructure, 20th century infrastructure, where a particular role could be defined at a point in time and probably hold sway for about 20 years with limited modification of how that role was contributing to the business, right? What work people are actually doing, what contributions they're making in the 21st century have to be tracked differently based on, and this, a task ontology, but tasks are organic and ever changing. And so how companies define a person's contributions based on the function in the business, a job architecture leaves you behind because it's only focused on your role within a classification system of compensation regions. And we have to figure out how to evaluate the value of contribution, right? And I have no issues with, companies figuring out a structure for compensation and contribution and talent mobility. But if we don't start to begin building workforce intelligence models that are constantly reevaluated based on people's contributions into work, and bringing that forward as part of a business measure that is ongoing, then we're never going to be able to adapt into this new world, right? And so how do you begin to build that infrastructure of task identification of what you need and task contribution of the individual team member? And how do you constantly reevaluate that in a way that says this resource is providing value, but and we can extract that value, and or this resource has the capability of contributing value in this other domain, or can be working across these other domains. We have no insights into that in our business, which is why we remain siloed because of the old job architecture structure. You know, we know it's a classification system. It's like the old tracking systems within education, where you would be evaluated based on your capability early on, put in a track and a classification system, and stay within that vertical because you were evaluated at a particular point in time, with never ever being really measured on your potential for growth.
Yep.
Right. And I think this is where the market is going. This is where businesses are going, is what are the intelligence infrastructures we need to better measure our workforce and the demand in order to constantly evolve. Because if we do not acknowledge that work is evolving in at least 6-month cycles versus 20-year cycles 100 years ago, then we don't understand the world we're living in today.
Yeah, and I honestly completely full on agree with you and I'll give everyone a live example of what I'm seeing in real life customers today. Big companies, right? US based, big. And what we're seeing is exactly what you said around the structure. So the first problem that we typically see is that work is invisible. Like no one actually understands the work that's happening other than the title. No one knows. Like, I mean, no one knows. That's not actually anything that we're seeing. So that's kind of one problem. The second problem that we have is that there's no intelligence to help folks think about redesigning it in a different way. So if you're in Dennis's situation or someone like Dennis's situation, and your role is to think about redesigning the workforce, and if you don't have any data, you're going to be just guessing based on like tribal knowledge and loud noises. What you want to be able to do is actually look at redesigning it based on data and fact. So where is task duplication? Where could AI be most effective? Where causes us the most pain, costs us the most money? Where is there greater opportunity for using our existing talent who are already really skilled and are just not in the most valuable place for them? And then what we see is, to your point as well, that so let's say they go and do the thing around the redesign and they start implementing AI. AI takes away tasks, but it also brings in new tasks.
That's right.
And to Dennis's point, like this is not a one-time thing. This is a ongoing re-engineering, or what we call rejigging, right? Like the ongoing evolution of work itself has to keep evolving. And the way that the job architecture is currently designed is just so archaic in terms of that structure. I can see, Rossa, you've got your hand up to say something. Are you wanting to jump in and ask a question, or do you want to put it in the chat, or was that an accident? Sometimes people hit it by an accident, so I don't want to call you out in case that's an accident. It might be an accident. Put it in the chat as well, Rossa. If you've got that question, we can get that to Dennis as well to ask that question. But to your point, Dennis, like and the way that I've been describing it to customers, and I'm a workforce optimization expert by background. Like I started my first career there, and then I built an AI company. So I'm one of the few people in the world who literally have had deep empathy for the problem. And also I understand AI more than anyone else in our space because I'm physically building it, right? And what we're saying to customers is that if you're going to create the new AI-powered workforce, you need critical infrastructure to enable that. The job architecture needs to be brought back up to date. It needs to be enabled in a way where it can help folks like you make really strategic decisions on redesign, re-engineering, AI implementation, and then looking at like the other thing that you said, which I love as well, is we don't want to do this to be taking people out of work. This is not about that. It's about the effective value creation that comes from matching an individual with their skills and capability into meaningful work. That is what you're saying that I love. And if you imagine you've got a specific role that has 68% of that role has high potential for AI, and the company is going to automate that out, what are the other things that that individual can do within the business that is task adjacent? So you're re-engineering. So think of re-engineering like your Jenga blocks. You're taking some out, you're putting some on, and it's this redesign. That's essentially what I'm hearing from you, Dennis, is that that's going to be the Jenga going forward.
And to your point, Siobhan, you need the infrastructure to make those decisions quickly, because go back to your point of archaic job architectures, you also have archaic job reevaluation processes that are subjective, not built on any intelligence, but a hiring manager's instincts, and a write-up of a JD that may not reflect the work that is actually needed in the business. And if you're going to say, we have a high value skill set in this employee, and we want to re-engineer work in order to get greater productivity and higher value, we've got to be able to make those decisions quickly and get that person functioning. And right now, those processes are not designed to do that because of job architecture and the way that we think about people infrastructure. I think we designed the data and the systems in the HR world for talent processes. We did not design them for the business.
Agree. And you know what's really interesting? Like my journey in building this company. So when we first started, do you remember it was all like democratizing careers was the marketplace, right?
Marco,
And
what does that even mean?
And from my perspective, like my brain is programmed for optimization and resource allocation. Right. So when we designed it with that in mind first. And then the second, and it wasn't because we didn't care about people, just to be clear, this is not about like optimization, squeezing assets. This is actually about like my expertise was naturally around flowing work to worker. And how do I do that? And I think like more commercial, typically because I was paid for by the company rather than HR, right? So that was kind of my previous career. But what has happened, and I'm spending quite a lot of my time at the moment with folks where they're still but the talent marketplace is about democratizing careers. And I'm like, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but your CEO right now is not at all talking about democratizing career. Your CEO and your shareholders and your board right now are wanting to move fast, increase velocity, create margin machines. And if you are going to them and talking to them about programs of work and trying to get a skills project signed off, and that you're talking about like career pathing and democratizing, you're kind of going to lose that fight pretty quickly. What you have done in terms of educating your business, and this is where I think the magic will come from this conversation, Dennis, you have done this great job of bringing everybody on the journey around rethinking this. We got a whole pile of HR folks who are really passionate about solving this problem, but they don't know how to position this with the organization, with the right people. How would you advise the listeners right now on someone who genuinely wants to do something really cool and do a transformation and help, but how do they see that in a way that it doesn't feel like that old democratizing career vitamin problem rather than painkiller? Like how do you start that journey?
Well, I think you start that journey by leaning into the truth, which is what you just said, Siobhan, in that we're engaging in this process to make the business more productive and more efficient and align our workforce with business objectives. And if you start the conversation there, right, the rest of it can fall into place. The idea of talent mobility, I like to call it job pathing. I don't like to call it career pathing because career pathing is an old notion. The reality is that we are all a series of the jobs we hold, whether we move this way, whether we move this way, or whether we move laterally. I know enough about workforce assessment and team member assessment. Everybody has their own journey, and it's up to the individual to kind of decide their path. What you want to be able to do for the business is empower people to make the best decisions where they're going to make the greatest contributions. And this is really about extracting value from the workforce. And I think career pathing is individually focused. It's not business focused.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and yes, there has to be an intersection of those two things, but you cannot talk about one without the other anymore, because there's the mindset, and I am a job access advocate. I do pro bono consulting for job access nonprofits that are looking for non-traditional populations to gain access to the workforce. I believe in economic empowerment, but economic empowerment in today's world isn't a singular vision of a career path anymore. It's how do I get access to work and evolve for growth in order to create business impact. And if we can start using that language, I think it's that we are always looking for these finite paths that lead, that were part of our past versus part of our future. My higher ed background, I've seen the other side of this equation, and what are we educating our youth for in our educational models? And I say educational models because not everyone attends college. There are workforce development. What does a post-high school productive life look like? What does a post-college undergraduate productive life look like? Those outcomes are changing, and industries are changing. Look at law school, right? If you actually look at the measures of law school and people attending, the numbers are going down. The ROI on attending law school is changing because technology has disrupted that field. There's questions on whether law school should be 3 years versus 2 years, because the ROI on that investment held for so many, for centuries. But now the actual ROI on that profession, you're starting to see it decline in terms of the investment of education versus what you're going to earn over your lifetime and the opportunity that you may gain, right? It's a whole field being disrupted. So making a decision about that career path today requires a different mindset, in that how many attorneys are now retooling, right? And evolving with work because they're taking on different jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, I know that I'm putting a lot of context around it. The business objectives have to be at the forefront of every decision we make regarding the job economy. And today, there is no room for not having the intelligence to understand how work is changing, because while we're evolving at a much more accelerated pace than we were. Businesses had time to adjust and still meet their business objectives within their workforce capabilities, and they do not have that luxury anymore.
And it's, what's really interesting? Like when I started talking like this, there was like gasps. People were like, oh, she's talking about like productivity and velocity and like operational efficiency. And I was kind of going a little bit against the grain while everyone was talking about career pathing. I'm talking about that's all super important, but these people won't have jobs if I can't figure out this actual bigger problem right now, which is make the company make more money to make sure that everyone can come along this journey. And there was in the HR community this kind of sense of like, did she just say that? And I was like, if you're not thinking about this, and the amount of folks that don't read their investor board reports and their earnings reports and are so disconnected from the actual problems of the board, and then they're complaining that they can't get a skills project signed off. And I'm like, what's the skills project for? Well, we want to make sure that we have a skills-based workforce. And I'm like, for what? Like, why? Like, what for? Like,
right. Well, I also think the mistake companies are making is they're embedding it in their L&D agenda,
Yeah.
and they're not embedding it in their business strategy agenda.
Yeah.
Right. And I will say I feel very privileged at Micron that I'm part of the strategy team. Right. My title is Director of Skilling Strategy, but it's skilling strategy as it applies to meeting the business objectives, even though it's through the lens of the people org. But that's an acknowledgement that the people org has to contribute to business strategy.
Yep. Yep. I mean, the most expensive asset in a company, unless you are an airline and own planes, is your people.
That's right.
So the way that Micron are thinking about this is super clever, because to exactly my point at the beginning, like, we have been growing so fast in our growth because of what we're doing. But what we're finding, and the commonality that's happening, is it's either someone like you or it's coming from the business. But
That's right.
someone like you is talking like the business. So that's where we're seeing this really great like movement that's happening right now. And that's where I'm kind of like, to folks listening, it's like stop talking about skills based for the sake of skills based. Like, go and read the board report, figure out what's happening in the organization, what is the pressure points, and figure out how do you mobilize your workforce in a way that enables your CEO to achieve those goals. And I think that's where you have done a really great job of translating the business requirements into how does this look like from our workforce, and how do we deliver that from a resource allocation perspective. It's called skills, but actually you're looking at it at a much bigger level than just skills.
I agree with you. Skills, in my mind, is just a placeholder term for workforce productivity.
Yep.
And adding greater value. And I've done a lot of research on intergenerational behaviors, the impacting the way we work and the workforce and the disruptions. And what's interesting, I have 4 children, 3 of them part of Gen Z, one part Gen Alpha, and I'm watching that generation understand that they have to access work and they have to think about their next job, and they're teaching themselves through independent access to information. It's, what do I need to know today in order to do this job in this moment, and not so concerned with, I have to upscale myself for what I'm doing 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Because they know they have tools to actually educate themselves in real time for the next job when that moment comes.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, do you know what I used to believe? That I've changed my thought. It's not that I've changed, I've evolved my thought process. I used to believe that every major organization would become quite like a professional services environment where work allocation moved, which is my background.
Right.
And I used to think it was based on skill, and that, that whole concept of like, you're going to go in and you're going to pay for skills, and you have your gig workers and you've got your internal people, blah, blah, blah. Where I've actually got to now, given the work ontology and the work that we're doing, is it's not going to be a skills-based economy. It's going to be a task economy. You're going to price per task. Those things in America, what do you call, like TaskRabbit and all of those things? Like, actually, that's going to be how I work. In my kids, I got like 10 and 7, they're going to end up just pricing a piece of work like a mini SOW, and essentially pricing it like the Uber model, right? Uber is not based on skill, it's based on task.
Well, it's based on and what is a task? It's actually an application of skill, right?
Exactly.
So we're so focused on, well, this person is evaluated that they have the skill, but how they actually apply that skill to produce efficiency in task, we are not talking about that, Siobhan. But
100%.
The next generation is just like, I'm acquiring the capability to do this so I can go perform a task.
Yeah. Yeah. Yelena from Microsoft. So one of the big debates that I had with her, and it was like mind blowing for me. So we were talking about skills proficiency, and we were having this whole debate about skills proficiency. And I was still on the left-hand side of skills proficiency and thinking about it, that it was really important. And she said, but in your model, does skill proficiency even matter if task completion is evidence of ability to perform the task? And doesn't it more become less about the skills proficiency and more did Jane complete this task at a higher quality than Bob? Was the velocity output different? And my mind was like, oh my God, I have not been thinking big enough, people.
I just had this conversation this morning. I was evaluating an assessment vendor, and we got to this fraud slide about, oh, what if someone uses AI to help with the practice-based assessment? Will the skill proficiency level be real? And I thought, my thinking was like Yelena's, and I challenged them. I said, if the person can demonstrate they perform the task more efficiently with the use of AI, what do I care what proficiency level of skill they had? Right?
It's mad, isn't it? I didn't
Right.
sleep, I think, for 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, and so, Yelena is right. But this is where I say we have to come up with much clearer measures of performance output that are less subjective. This becomes part of the infrastructure rebuild.
Yep.
And Yelena, she and I had a brief conversation about this. How do you start to measure performance on the demonstration of that capability in a real way?
Yep.
Capability proficiency against task is going to be the new measure.
Yep, I agree. And I think right now we're talking like so big, because the reality will be it'll take time for organizations to shift, right?
Of course.
But
we have to be the vision, right?
100%. But the foundational model has to be rebuilt right now. We've got to lay the road right now for everyone else to drive on. And that is what the expectation of leaders today should be, is that you need to redesign and create your new critical infrastructure that enables the shift and ability for the organization to fully evolve into this vision. And
right.
if you're all still stuck on job architectures, we're all doomed, to be completely frank.
Well, if you're stuck on job architectures, if you're still stuck on content-driven L&D catalogs, if you're still stuck on all of these technical infrastructures that are even in recruitment, that are about sourcing candidates for numbers and not capability, companies are spending a lot on what I will call the transition of enablement that occurred in the late 20th century and 21st century with scale that technology allowed for, but it wasn't intentional, right? And so there were large spends on scales through the lens of tech stack, but no one really knows whether they're having impact on the business anymore from an HR perspective.
Yep. Yep. And even what I'm seeing as well, to layer on that. So if I'm sitting with organizations and they've got all of these completely different tech stacks that are sitting there, I'm like, that all doesn't matter. Like, because you're going to have an agent that's going to talk to your employee from pre-hire to retire. You're going to take, I as an employee am going to demand that I don't have to go to 10 million different places, that I should be able to ask my payroll, how many days leave have I got, what career is available for me now. Like, I should be able to get all of that in one experience where it's orchestrating off the back end. And the only way that will be possible is actually if you've got good data foundations, because the models will depend on the good data. So again, back to critical infrastructure, we got to get this built in right now to enable all of that new transformation, right?
I agree. It's one of the debates I'm having with the business right now, because there are a lot in the skills arena pushing for new technologies. And I said to the business, you know what? I'd rather take a pause on new technologies in this moment, see what we have in order to continue to enable our practice, maximize that value spend, and rebuild the data infrastructure and start organizational change management in the practice of use of that intelligence, because I believe that's where our money is better spent.
Yep, I agree. I mean, we've got a UI part of our product, but we're really helping our customers think about like the future state. So I don't really care so much about the UI. I care some more about the actual data and getting them that enablement. And it really is dependent on if the customer has some complexities. But if you've got systems, we should already be trying to make them actually full of the right data, because the ultimate situation will be that there's going to be an agent that'll just become the interface. And I've got an agent API, right? So I've built agent APIs where I can just plug in and you can have that. And I think that's where it's going to go. And to your point about our kids, like my kids are already, fluent in ChatGPT. They're already all over this stuff. By the time our kids go to school, they're going to be in the situation where they're not even going to like ask for it. They're going to be like, you mean you go into a UI? Like what?
Right. Right. You go into a
No one
UI.
talks
What?
to me and says good
Right.
morning. Like I
Right.
cannot believe that technology is so rude.
That's exactly right. And listen, this is where education has to adapt as much as business.
Mhm.
Value, right? We talk about CEOs and value and efficiency. They're margin makers. Universities are no different in being margin makers. Their investment of that margin is just
Yeah.
a different direction. You have to reinvest in research and all of those things. But the reality is the value that they bring of their product to their customer has to change because the students aren't extracting the same value in terms of their return because they're going out and they're educating themselves alongside their faculty and they're starting to
Mhm.
recognize it, right?
Yeah.
Because their expectations of learning are changing.
Yeah. What do you think that given you've had this beautiful career of academic and education and and practical and industry, like what do you think the businesses can learn from that part of your career? Like what is there that can be
I
transferable?
I would say to you, that's a hard question because there's been so much disruption in education. I would say take a lesson from education that did not adapt quickly enough to serve social good for all in the world of work, right? And understand that education systems did not adapt quickly, did not build the data intelligence and infrastructure they needed, and did not build the capability they needed to keep up with the economy and the way it was reshaping. And there are many
Hmm.
articles being written about this now, and therefore are failing and are in decline. And there's a whole new world of educational projects going on about how do we train our youth for the future, right? Businesses have the capability of rebuilding their infrastructures and reinvesting in new capabilities. And it goes back to our conversation, of role versus task. If businesses don't start to buy into the change and invest in it, they're going to fall way behind the way education has fallen behind. This is my,
Yeah.
if businesses learn anything, I also think that businesses now have the social responsibility because one of the things that I'm at the intersection of is if education institutions aren't providing the readiness we need for work today, right? Do
Hmm.
businesses have any responsibility of putting education out there pre-candidate in order to start help building their own pipelines because they're wondering where they're going to get their pipelines from. So they have to distribute their knowledge and start pushing education to adapt more quicker in a more accelerated fashion. And I was at the center of this work in my last project in workforce development in the Rochester region, where skills, we put the term skills on it, but essentially industry objective driven curriculum that was relevant to job we were building a framework to develop curriculum and access to work at the job level, not this mindset of we're preparing you for a career, right?
Hmm.
How we chunk education has to change, and businesses have to be the influencers of that in this.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, they are the economy that essentially pays for the skill, right? So
That's
it's like the demand and supply has to be in line or we got a problem. And I think the point you made about the lawyers, like you imagine being a kid and invest in your whole period of your time and all your money, and then walking out and everyone's using ChatGPT to write their legal contracts. Can you imagine how shit that would feel? Like, and you would just, and also, you know what else? Why did no one tell me this? Like, where are the companies? Like, if it was me and if I was running a company that isn't like my company, like an actual corporate, I would feel, I've heard so many stories of real life customers who have put people on learning pathways and career pathways, who have said, these are our critical jobs. I have no idea how they came up with these being the critical jobs because they were just random jobs. So that's problem number one. They picked all these random jobs and then
you get executives in a room to make decisions with data.
Right. And then, so not only did they pick these random jobs, they then drive their businesses and their people. So a lot of these circumstances, these people are not people sitting in big, cushy jobs. These are people that might be working 2 jobs to pay their mortgage right now. So on top of the life stress of having that situation, they are then making them do courses for jobs that they believe are going to be the future. And then after the 2-year period that they've completed this, they turn around and go, oh, guys, I'm so sorry. We got that wrong. Actually, those jobs are gone. I don't think that that is in any way acceptable from an organization. And the thing that really pisses me off is that there needs to be, like, you cannot be driving learning strategies right now with actually doing proper due diligence. Don't pay a consultant to go and tell you what jobs the futures are, because they have no idea either, by the way.
Right.
Go and do an analysis, exactly what you said, of what is the work, what is the impact to our work, what does that mean we will need to be, because that can give you the horizon of the next 1 and 2 horizons of where are we going in the next 3 to 5 years. Then get people on learning pathways. That's what you define, because that's the problem. And it really annoys me because it's like you're actually wasting someone's actual time and potential by you not even doing the due diligence that you should be doing.
Right. But let's go back to the time. It's because you're developing 2-year programs to get to a role. It's a traditional model of pathing. Actually, learning should be chunked in, okay, we need these capabilities in you in the next 3 months. And here's a set of learning experiences that are going to help enhance your ability to perform now.
Yep.
Right?
Agree.
Builds, right? That builds over time, and we have to rethink our model of learning at the same time. And this is where companies, to your point, have outsourced both the education that happens prior to acquisition of workforce, and they're outsourcing their training and development without actually directing it towards capability building and higher performance in task.
Yep. And this is why these conversations with you are so exciting, because you see the world differently from me, but at the same level of vision that I have, which is, if you do not have the critical infrastructure and understand the work, you cannot direct the traffic in any meaningful way without it just being like a guess. Like, it's just guesswork, right? And don't get me started about strategic workforce planning. That whole element of it is just based off like random crappy data. And I think the thing that's going to be really important is, the other dimension to add to what you said about the learning that I just remembered was, we're working with this customer. They're now at phase 3, which is agent. Now we've made agent recommendations of what agent they can do with the task. When you bring in a new task, you create a new task. Or when you bring in a new agent, you bring in a new task.
Right.
That just-on-time learning is critical now for the business, because if I go and deploy millions of dollars worth of AI technology into the company and I'm the CEO, and if no one adopts this because they're not enabled, the whole thing flops. So there's this kind of just-on-time learning that enables the business to adopt. And then there will be the learning because of the pivot moment. So if I have impacted Dennis, what could he pivot into that's more meaningful for him and for the organization? What's the pathway to that? And then based on what we analyze in terms of our work today and where we're going in the next 5+ years, as our AI strategy evolves and our workforce evolves, what does those critical roles look like? That's how, if I was in my old job, that's what I would be doing right now. I would focus my energy on that.
Well, I wouldn't even call it critical roles. I'd call it critical functions.
Yeah,
I think,
true.
right? It's, what are the critical functions of our business going to be in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah.
Because again, the minute you say critical role, you're putting yourself in a box.
No, good call.
Defining it into the job architecture again, right? And so I'm preparing someone for this
Good call.
this box. To me, it's, what are the critical functions going to be? and we talk about pathing, we need to be working on an upskilling model that is about work pathing, not
Mm-hmm.
career pathing. Or again, if we're rejecting this old notion of a job architecture, then, and we're really talking about a workforce intelligence infrastructure about how capabilities need to change in order to meet the critical functions, then everything else we do has to change,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because
Yep.
even as we redesign the job architecture model, what we do with that intelligence is really about that hub that's going to impact our workforce.
Yep. I wasn't thinking big enough. I'm not going to sleep again tonight. This is the problem with these calls. But no, you're totally right. You're actually right, because it's not about career. It's about the function of requirement for the business based on that. And then how do you navigate the right work to the right worker? And in what context of the environment? Like, you're completely right. You are so right. My product team are going to go nuts when I call them tonight.
Not my fault, guys. I'm sorry.
No, but and this is where, I mean, this is where I think the way that you are like, one in a million because of the exposure you've had in your life, right? Like this is the thing. You are a collection of expertise that's melding together with a really strong perspective. And I love it. I love it because I think this is the exact kind of conversations we need to be having. Because to my point earlier on, the Siobhan gasps when she talks about efficiency. Like, if you're a HR person, you're not talking like this, you're probably going to get fired. Like, you'll probably literally get made, because they're going to need like to bring in like this level of like, if I was in my CEO role in an organization of that scale, you're going to need to get everybody rowing in the same direction. So
That's
if you're
right.
still pushing the business towards the old model, that like we need, and you're seeing a lot of change in the people space right now. And this is our moment, Dennis. This is the thing. This is actually the moment, HR people have been talking about getting the seat at the table thing. This is actually the moment in our industry right now where we can be highly valuable to the organization, because they don't know where the best place is to implement AI. They don't know the impacts. No one knows this. You guys are the closest thing we'll ever get to having that intel and being able to use it for really good decision making. But also there's that society and zero waste moment as well, that if our organizations are hurtling towards this AI, how do we navigate them to do the right thing? Because right now they're just thinking about it in the context of AI. They're not thinking about it across the space,
I
right?
agree, but I think it's because let's use the notion of chief people officer. I believe the world of C-suite is, you need a chief capability officer
Mm-hmm.
at the intersection of function and let's use the term skills, right? Because you need people, you need individuals with skills to perform the functions. That's the intersection of the business. Chief people officer is, how do we serve the workforce
Yeah.
and build the bridge to the business, but their primary focus is people. And
Mm-hmm.
that's great. But as we think about AI, it's capability.
Yep.
Right? HR now is as responsible for the effective use of AI and how it's driving the business as much as it's responsible for people. Someone has to be, there has to be a function looking at the intersection of all of that. And right now it
Yep.
doesn't exist.
Yep. And it's that conversation that's floating around about chief work officer and
Right.
capability. It's that, whatever you name it, it's that thing. I mean, and
That's
kind of
right.
in some ways, my old career, like I was responsible for like the allocation of work to worker.
Right.
And I wasn't in charge of anything to do with like people problems or like
Right. And we're
that
still,
stuff,
all those things will still exist,
and
but
matter.
and they matter, and I believe in them, right? But they're one domain. They're not the domain.
Yep, I agree. And this will actually has to sit in business,
Yes.
because I used to be half paid for by the people team and half paid for by the business. And my bonus was connected to the business outcomes. So
Yep.
I wouldn't get my bonus unless I achieved on utilization rates and performance, right? So, Dennis, I could keep you here forever and talk about this. This has been incredible. I just find having these conversations with you where you're just so precise on the way that you're thinking about it because you've spent your career in this moment. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. You can follow Dennis on LinkedIn. You can DM him, DM me if there's any follow-ups here. But a massive thank you to you, Dennis, and all the best with this new evolution of work that you're going on. I'm very excited.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And I hope to have more conversations with you, Siobhan. They're always enlightening.
I know, and I'll not sleep for 2 days after this, so thanks for that. See you soon. Bye.